In the beginning, we see our main protagonist named Davin who was just recently born, and in front of him standing his father who despises him because he doesn't meet his expectations. Davin was born without an arm, however, on the other hand, his cousin was born with the blessing of the sword god. He is a talented genius. Davin's parents want him to die. Many years passed, and when Kaijin was able to play on his own, Davin was not even able to walk. His mother and father just want him to die. His father feels jealous of his uncle, but he thinks that his son will be able to gain the lost reputation in his family. But Davin is just a one-armed laughingstock. At the time, when Davin learns how to walk, Kaijin, on the other hand, was able to wield a sword, which is why his mother still despises him. And when Davin was able to wield the sword, Kaijin became familiar with mana. One day his parents send him to help Kaijin, but he later learns that his parents sold him for 300,000 luden. Kaijin was beating him very badly, but no one comes forward to save him. Kaijin is very happy to beat him, so that day he resolves that no matter what, one day he will definitely beat Kaijin. Later, when Kaijin was practicing, he easily defeats his first opponent, and then he invites Davin to fight him. But he beat him severely and then insults him. On one side where Kaijin got involved in alcohol, drugs, and girls, Davin was hardworking to improve his skills. Finally, the day arrives when Davin will fight Kaijin, and eventually Davin was able to defeat him. But Kaijin feels very insulted, so he backstabbed our protagonist. Later, when our main protagonist opens his eyes, he found that he was bound in a chair, and in front of him stands a man who tells him that he was saved by a saint. But because he makes a contract with the devil, so he will be imprisoned for his whole life, and then the man threw Davin into prison. Davin realizes that, even though he has beaten Kaijin, his parents still chose Kaijin over him, because he hasn't made a contract with the devil. It was a plan to save Kaijin's reputation. Later, Kaijin also arrives in the prison. He insults our main protagonist and leaves him to die. Davin has become very weak, and in his last moments, he has only one thought. What if he was born with 2 hands and then he dies? Strangely, Davin opens his eyes where a man calling him Vincent. He remembers that the person in front of him was one of the members of the branch families. He also realizes that he now has his right hand, and the person in front of him tries to inflict pain on his right hand using mana, so Vincent pushes him to release his hand. The man got angry and threatened him that one day his son will crush him mercilessly. While the man was leaving, he tells him to wait for the true sword's day, and then he will show him who he is. After the man leaves, Vincent remembers the memory of the person in whose body he is. His mother died just after he was born, and his father never loves him nor care for him. His sibling always bullies him, just because he was not able to do anything in return. He then realizes that his soul gets swept into someone else's body. Just then he hears someone calling for him, who reveals to be the actual owner of the body, the real Vincent. But now his name is Julian. He informed him that now he is a minor god. He also reveals that if his spiritual energy disappears entirely, he will also die. Julian then shows him his entire memories, how people treat him, and how even though he can beat them, but he still didn't, because he never wants attention on himself, because he wants to entirely on his life mission. Julian then tells him that if he knows about Archdemon Davin and Hero King Kaijin. Upon listening to this, Vincent was taken aback. Julian goes on to tell him that 500 years ago, a one-armed swordsman named Davin escaped from Samian's prison, and while using a contract with a demon, he devoured thousands of lives in order to become stronger. Is it also rumors that he has killed more than 10,000 people? That's why he is remembered in history as a great demon. Upon listening to this, Davin become confused, wondering how he reincarnated 500 years ago in the future. In addition, he also becomes furious because his family not only abandoned him in a prison to die, but also fabricated a false story. Eventually, he calms down because being angry will change anything. Davin tells Julian that all of this story is fabricated. Julian then asks him if he is also from that era. Davin responded yes. Later, Julian tells him that the hero worked with the greatest hero of that time, his best friend, named Sun, who to Davin's surprise turns out to be the same boy he knew by the name Ashland, who at that time was a faithful admirer of Davin. When Davin was in the prison, visited Davin several times, and he is the only one who believed that Davin hadn't done anything wrong. It was accused. Ashland also assures Davin that he will take revenge for him. But after that day, Ashland never visits him, because, since that time, he had become the family patriarch and had made it his life's mission to uphold what Julian refers to as the achievement. possibility relationship to achieve goal of surpassing family Samson and facing truth for our protagonist. As is so, it wasn't a coincidence that his friend had abandoned the family they were part of and created a new one in order to uncover the truth. Later, Julian told David that if he accepts his mission and completes it, he will remain with his body forever, giving him even an incredible blessing. Our protagonist finally expressed gratitude to his good friend and decided to take over the mission that was left behind in order to surpass the family that betrayed him. In one instance, Vincent begins to feel his body becoming very heavy, despondent, and collapsing easily due to how weak he is. As a result, he felt the need to call Julian and inquire as to why he had never learned the art of swordsmanship. Julian replies that he had a disability that didn't allow him to learn it. Vincent asks him this question because he discovers that this body has an exoskeleton blessing. But Julian doesn't understand anything, so our main protagonist explains to him that allows a person to store mana in any part of their body or as far as their eyes. The next day, according to Julian Vincent's words and explanation, the listener is required to wake up and understand how things work in that new era in the world. Because now people don't store mana inside their body, but inside the stars. Because storing mana inside your heart also risks your life. The more stars an individual has, the more powerful he is. At the night, when Vincent was meditating to increase mana proficiency, his servant named Winston enters the room and mocks him to create a mess inside the room. Vincent orders him to bring him some fresh clothes, but Winston declines, telling him that he is not here for doing such types of work. Vincent threatens Winston, telling him that he can take his clothes, but by doing this, Winston's job will be in danger. Upon listening to this, Winston brings him new clothes. Later, our protagonist ordered Wilson to bring a 1-meter wooden sword. Wilson asks him what if he refuses. Vincent replies that nothing, he will go himself. Wilson gets scared and agrees to bring a wooden sword for our protagonist. Later, Wilson brings him a sword and leaves. After getting a sword, Vincent starts to play around in simple terms and starts doing practice to make his body strong, but gets tired just after swinging it for few times. Just then, someone destroys the puppet with which our protagonist is training. He revealed that his name is Ravan Adinka, and insulted our protagonist by calling him useless. He is the son of the man our protagonist meets just after reincarnating in this new body. He is also one of the participants of the Assembly of True Swords. Julian explains to him that it is a competition in which numerous children of martial families are gathered in order to fight using real swords. The winner of the competition gets the chance to fight the descendant of the direct family. Vincent then insults Ravan and his father. Ravan gets angry upon listening to this and put his wooden sword on the neck of our protagonist. Despite knowing that he will be lost in an instant, our protagonist also points his sword toward him with such a confident face that even Ravan gets scared seeing it. Vincent tells him that if was frightened by a wooden sword, how will he fight in the competition using real swords? Ravan gets angry and launches an attack. Julian gets scared and tells Vincent to evade the attack. But Vincent tells him not to worry as he will not be able to attack him. Just then, Ravan's escort appears and stopped Ravan before he could do anything to our protagonist. He explains to Ravan that if he attacks him now, he will have the excuse to dodge the fight. And if this happens, you will not be able to fight him, even if you won the True Sword Assembly. Later, in the room, Julian informs our protagonist that in this era, people have traits also known as blessings, and Ravan also has one. His blessing helps him to strengthen his body. Vincent quickly realizes that if he has to beat him, he must become strong, and in very less time. So the next day, he proceeds with his training early in the morning. He tries to cut the puppet with his sword, but was unable to do so. While the servants are making fun of him, the vice commander of the White Sword unit named Merlin appears and tells him to stop, because there is nothing funny about the young lord of the Adinka family training. The servants apologize and run to their work. Upon seeing Vincent tired, Merlin gives him a potion to regain his stamina so that he can continue his training. His training is fruitful, so eventually he was able to store mana inside his body and was able to cut the puppet. Later, Winston served Vincent food. But upon seeing that Winston has stolen his food, the protagonist gives him a warning that he will not tolerate it if he does this again. Winston tries to scare Vincent by telling him that he used to be a backstreet gangster, but Vincent pays no attention to it. On contrary, he surprises Winston by showing him that now he can use mana. Later, Merlin visits the place where Vincent was training, and gets surprised that he was able to cut down a puppet with a wooden sword. In addition, he wonders what type of training he was doing to gain such proficiency in swordsmanship in such a short time span. On the other side of the story, we see that Ravan is working out at his home with a large, weighted sword as that recurring thought keeps popping into his head. Image of Vincent startling him. Just then Ravan's father enters the room and tells him that if they wish to escape the life of poverty and the sorrow of the branch families, Ravan must defeat Vincent. Just like Vincent's father in his previous life, Ravan's father was so jealous of the main family, so he imprinted in his son's mind that he must defeat the main family. And that is why Ravan become like this. In the room, Julian reveals that the winner of the True Sword Assembly will be awarded with the mana crystal. And if one ingests it, his body as well as mana will both grow stronger instantaneously. Vincent gets motivated and tells Julian that he will give him the victory he can't think of. He calls for Winsome and tells him to do something for the protagonist, but it is not revealed to us. Later, Winsome visits a woman named Raelsa, but he was too scared because the woman in front of him was 7-star martial artist. Winsome tells her that the protagonist wants to meet the head of the family. What a boy, he doesn't even have the courage to meet his father. The woman visits her head, who is meditating at that time. Raelsa informs him that Vincent wants him to be present at the True Sword Assembly, as he was going to prove his worth. He asks her if she thinks that Vincent will be able to win the tournament. The woman declines, but also offered that if Vincent loses she will happily give Vincent her head. It is also revealed that Raelsa once was the servant of Vincent's mother, so she is willing to do anything for Vincent's sake. The head eventually agrees to be present at the tournament to watch over his son. Oh sorry, he doesn't even consider Vincent his son. Finally, the day of the True Sword Assembly arrives. Ravan was too motivated to defeat Vincent, and when he sees the patriarch of the main family, he becomes even more motivated, as this was his chance to prove his worth in front of the patriarch. The first round begins, and Ravan was fighting. When his opponent attacks Ravan, his sword shreds into pieces just by touching Ravan. Ravan easily defeats his opponent, and Ravan's father becomes very happy upon seeing his son's performance in the tournament. The audience present also praises Ravan, as despite being young he was already a 2-star martial artist. On the other side, the protagonist comments that the children of this era are more genius than 500 years ago, but the problem is that they have close to no depth in their martial arts. Their strength comes from their attributes, they don't have any experience. Ravan's next fight begins, and he again easily defeats his opponent. Ravan then declares that he has won all of his matches and is now according to the rules set by the elders. He earns the right to fight the descendant of the main family, our protagonist, Vincent. Vincent accepts the challenge. Before the fight began, Vincent announces that instead of a real sword he will only use a wooden sword, and will only fight using his left hand. And on top of that also let Ravan have 2 attacks first, and he will not move even a single step until he uses all his 3 attacks. Ravan gets angry thinking that the protagonist doing all of this to move him. Ravan's father tells the patriarch that Vincent is making nonsense, but he ignores him and allows it. In addition, he also tells Vincent to prove his word through his action. Vincent has a smile on his face. The fight to prove their worth finally starts. Ravan suddenly launches his attack, but Vincent, on the other hand, easily opposes his sword with his bare hand. It surprises Regin quite a lot. Now he has 1 free attack, so again tries to attack our protagonist, but Vincent again easily evades his attack and throws Ravan on the ground. Ravan has used all of the attacks, so now it is time for our protagonist to play his moves. Everyone, including Vincent's father, gets surprised upon seeing Ravan struggling against a guy who cannot even use mana. Pity for this guy who is not aware of the fact that our protagonist now can use mana. Ravan again gets up and tells him that he might have received the blessing of weak men or God, which is why he becomes strong in a short period of time. Ravan then attacks our protagonist, but Vincent was able to read his moves, so he easily evades Ravan's attacks and then attacks Ravan. But Vincent's attacks have no effect, because the wooden sword is not able to break the defense of the strengthening body. Ravan gains confidence and launches another attack, but Vincent pushes him back and decides to give his all in his next attack, because after his next attack he will not be able to fight longer. He then tells Julian to watch his new skill, which he mastered. It is a skill that can cut space, twist the flow of mana, and use it to sever everything, including the enemy's attack. This is true swordsmanship according to him. Vincent cut Ravan's right hand. Man, you shouldn't be that brutal. Vincent then tells the referee to announce him winner, or should he also cut his right leg? The referee announces Vincent as the winner of the fight. Jaren, our medicine over Ravan's hand, while Ravan's father is running toward them. A man tells Jaren that pouring a potion will not work. They should take him to the priest. Vincent asks Jaren why despite his warning he hasn't prevented a tragedy. Janir apologizes to the protagonist. Patriarch then tells everyone to come inside, as the awards ceremony will begin. Just when the Patriarch is awarding Vincent with the Mana Stone, Ravan enters and tells the Patriarch to stop. He also claims that Vincent has borrowed the power of the Apostle. Just then another man enters and informs the Patriarch that Ravan's hand cannot be reattached. Ravan's father tells him what nonsense he is talking. He is a priest, therefore he should be able to easily heal injuries, but the priest replies that he hadn't seen any injury like this before, and it is severed by something his divine abilities cannot heal. Ravan's father desperately exclaims that Vincent must have used some tricks to defeat Ravan. Vincent comes forward and orders Jaren to arrest Ravan's father because it is the Patriarch who announces Vincent as the winner of the tournament. And right now he is denying the Patriarch's authority as well as the authority of the guests present at the time of the fight. Upon listening to this, Jaren arrested Charles Adinka. Patriarch then praises Vincent, and Julian becomes happy because it was not easy to receive praise directly from the Patriarch. Then upon Julian's advice, Vincent comes forward and suggests the priest to use his mana crystal to reattach Ravan's hand. He then tells Ravan's father that he can heal Ravan, but in return, he must sacrifice his hand. Charles accepts his offer to sacrifice his own hand for his son. Just when Charles was about to cut his hand, Vincent acts cool and tells Jaren to prevent any mishaps, so Jaren easily cuts the sword. Vincent then gives his mana stone to the priest, who uses it to reattach Ravan's hand. Winston, who was listening to everything from behind the closed gate, recalls the scene where the protagonist tells him to choose if he wants to work under him out of fear, or if he wants to be loyal to the protagonist, and as of now, the protagonist becomes too cool for him. He chooses to become loyal to the protagonist. Inside the room, Ravan was crying while hugging his father, while Vincent was sitting on his chair inside the room. Winston arrives and informs him that he is bringing him food. Just then, a man enters the room and introduces himself, Dullian, a Pontifex of Gaia. He was the same priest to heal Ravan. When Vincent asks him why he is here, Dullian expresses his gratitude for helping earlier, and gives him a man stone which he truly deserves. When the protagonist asks him why is he giving mana stone to him, Dullian explains that because of him he was able to understand the value of mana stone and human life. In addition, Dullian also gives him a token and explains that if he ever wants help from the temple, he can show this card, and they will help him. Later, Julian explains to him that the Patriarch usually eats alone, but once he invites Julian's sister to eat with him, because she had an overwhelming win in the True Sword Assembly, and there is a chance that today he might also invite our protagonist. Just then Wilson opens the gate, and before he can complete his sentence, Vincent already guessed that the Patriarch invited him. At the doorway, Vincent meets his stepmother, Hylium, who praises him for winning the True Sword tournament. In the room, the Patriarch reveals that he just invited him for two reasons. First is to congratulate him, and second, to check whether Carl's concerns were true or not, whether our protagonist has made a contract with Apostle or not. Just then, Vincent's stepmother uses his power to check the truth, and she tells the Patriarch that he doesn't seem to have a supporter. She also reveals that the technique he used once belongs to the hero Kajin, and he uses this skill to defeat the archdemon Davin. The protagonist gets angry upon hearing this because the skill didn't belong to Kajin but to Davin. Just then, his stepmother acts like a maniac and demands an explanation of how he was able to learn this skill. The protagonist quickly realizes that it was not his father who invites him but his stepmother, because she wants to interrogate our protagonist. Julian gets scared and tells Vincent that he should not say anything because she is able to discern the truth from the lies with her eyes. And if he comes up with any sloppy answer despite having insufficient knowledge about this era, she will easily be able to catch it. Vincent then tells Julian if he should tell her that he is not real Vincent, but Julian instantly declines his idea. Vincent comes up with an idea and tells her that he has received a revelation, but she suspected because he still hadn't received a blessing. And one cannot receive revelation without a blessing unless they are evil. In addition, she also tells him to tell her the truth, or he will have to go through the sacred court trials. However, Vincent replies that if he is truly evil, wouldn't the priest that holds a rank 3 mana crystal recognize it? He also shows her the mana crystal he received from Dullian, He tells her that he learned swordsmanship because now he is able to read some mysterious movements. The patriarch then makes his decision. He tells Vincent that he can continue his martial arts training, but Vincent's stepmother shows her concern that if he uses the hero Kajin's swordsmanship, the Samian family would make a fuss about it and will say that they have stolen it from them. But the patriarch tells her that he has already considered all of this, so there is no need for her to remind him. The patriarch then tells Vincent that he has shown great results at the assembly of the true sword, so he will desire him something he wants. Vincent, upon Julian's suggestion, replies that he wants permission to enter the library. The patriarch allows his request. He also gives him a sword named the Crimson Lotus. It is a sword that the patriarch uses when he was young. Just when Vincent was leaving with his servant, his stepmother arrives and asks him how will he defeat the Crimson Demon. Then it is revealed that if one wants to become a full-fledged martial artist, he must defeat the Crimson Demon. Vincent replies that he still doesn't have any plans. His mother then also explains to him that because of using the strange sword movements his body is not in a good state, and he will die if he fights in his current state. Vincent thanks her for her advice and takes his leave. The next morning, Vincent was in a very good mood. But just then a maid named Sari hit him from behind because she thinks that he was still plotting something behind Vincent's back. But Vincent declines her claims. Inside the room, Vincent seems to be very frustrated because despite getting permission to enter the library, he was not able to find any record from 500 years ago as if they are intentionally taken out. Vincent drops this thought and decides to continue his training because as of now he cannot do anything about it, and he also has to defeat the Crimson Demon. Julian asks our protagonist about his real identity, and Vincent wonders if should he reveal the truth or lie to him. He decides to tell the truth, but when Vincent replies to him, something strange happens that causes Julian to scream in pain. He also was not able to hear Vincent's answer. Just then Vincent spots a book titled First Love with the Water. While reading the book, Vincent discovers that the main character of the book doesn't have imagery, but he has traits. So Vincent decides to keep the book with him. After leaving, Vincent encounters Sari, who asked him whether it is true or notes that he has won the assembly of the true sword. Vincent recalls the memory through which he learns that Sari is the person who gave blind affection to Vincent even if he was a loser. So Vincent decides not to be rude to her. So he explains to her that it is true and recently he started learning martial arts. However, Ravan also appears there. Inside the room, Ravan takes his sword out and tells Vincent that he has come to repay him for the true sword assembly. Vincent thinks that Ravan is going to attack him, so he takes his stance and orders Sari to get out of there. But something strange happened. Instead of attacking Vincent, Ravan apologizes and tells him that he owes him so much, even though he behaves rudely with him, but still he gives him his mana crystal. In past, he always acts like a coward, but from now on he will watch his behavior. In addition, he swears his loyalty to him. Julian told him to not fall for his word, but the protagonist thinks otherwise. Vincent accepts his loyalty, and he too will be by his side until he betrays him. Ravan spots that Vincent now has a Crimson Lotus sword, which means that he had been appointed by the Patriarch. Julian gives Vincent advice to learn the Dwarf King's blessing from him. On the other side, Hylium informs the Patriarch that Vincent is planning to join the Crimson Fortress in the upcoming years. When Vincent's father asks her about the Crimson Demon conquest, she reveals that she wants to inform him about the features of demons, but he didn't listen to her. He was very confident. In addition, she also informs him that Ravan is now living with him. On the other side, Ravan is teaching Vincent how to acquire the Dwarf King's blessing. He recalls the time when Vincent asks him to teach him how to acquire a blessing because till now he hasn't received imagery. Ravan accepts and begins to guide the flow in his body. Julian gets nervous because Vincent is going very fast by risking his life. Just when he was able to control the mana current, the outburst of energy pushes him backward. On the other side, the Patriarch tells Helium to inform Vincent that he must defeat the Crimson Demon in 1 month. Later, Raelsa decides to visit Vincent to deliver the Patriarch's message to him that he has to complete the rite of passage in 1 month. When she opens the gate, she gets surprised upon seeing the current situation. She demands an explanation from him. Ravan gets scared after seeing Rayla because she was a 7-star martial artist. She then tells him about the Patriarch's message. Vincent gets happy upon listening to this because as of now the Patriarch never set time foundation for anyone, which means that the Patriarch has expectations from Vincent. Raelsa then informs him that for 1 month she will accompany him as personal protector. Ravan is worried because according to him it will take 2 months for Vincent to acquire Dwarf Blessing, so it will not gain easy for him to defeat the Crimson Demon. Later, when Ravan informs him that he will not be able to teach him the Dwarf King's blessing, but just then the protagonist surprised him by showing Ravan the result of his training. With a smile on his face, he reveals his intention to surpass the Patriarch's expectation and defeat the Crimson Demon before the Time Foundation. 2 weeks later, Vincent goes to a forest to start manifestation of the trait. In addition, he tells Ravan to step back, because there might be an explosion like last time, but Ravan doesn't agree with him, because he wants to witness his success. The protagonist then begins the manifestation and just then the Dwarf King appears, but no one besides Julian was able to see him. The Dwarf King then gives our protagonist, and Ravan informs him that it is a body-strengthening trait. Vincent thanks Ravan for his help, and also asks for another favor from him. 2 days later, Vincent heads out to complete his rite by defeating the demon. Vincent apologizes to Raelsa for the sudden request, but she doesn't mind it. She has only one thing in mind: she had accompanied all of Vincent's brothers and there is none who failed the trial, so she wishes that Vincent wouldn't become the first main family heir to fail the trial. So she tells Vincent to consider it once again. However, Vincent on the other hand has sky-high confidence, so he tells her not to worry. Later, Raelsa asks Vincent if he studies anything about the Crimson Demon and whether he has any plan to defeat him. Because according to her, Vincent is not a 3-star martial artist, but Vincent replies that the Crimson Demon is a low-level demon, so there is no need for Vincent to study about him. Vincent asks her why she is trying to help him. Raelsa replies that it is obvious to help him because she is the guardian as well as the protector of this trial. Vincent asks her if she is doing all of this to hide budget embezzlement. But if she doesn't want to talk about it, it is fine for the protagonist, because she didn't ask about his training. After a short time, they arrived at the lair of the Crimson Demon, also called the Old Temple. Upon arriving, Raelsa cast a mana barrier that will allow only one demon to pass through at a time. Vincent gets excited upon seeing the Crimson Demon and tells Raelsa to report exactly what she sees to the Patriarch. Just then demons attack the protagonist. Julian gets scared and tells Vincent to increase the distance between himself and the demon. But Vincent doesn't think like that, because if he increases the distance, then it will be advantageous for one with a larger weapon, so he decides to reduce the distance. Raelsa praised his decision to reduce the distance. It is all of Vincent's tactic to make the demon angry because the Crimson Demon has a very aggressive personality, so his neck attack will gonna be full of openings, and it is easy to win against an opponent with lots of openings. Vincent then attacks and kills the Crimson Demon, and looks at Raelsa with a smile on his face. But Raelsa is worried because the reason why the Crimson Demon cannot be defeated with a single strike is that the creature has 2 lives. So when our protagonist is distracted, the Crimson Demon revives and launches an attack on the protagonist. Vincent easily evades the attack thinking that it is the same as 500 years ago, but suddenly Demon again attacks him. That surprises Vincent a lot. Because, unlike his previous life, in this era, when the Crimson Demon revives itself, his strength as well speed both no increase. Julian was not happy upon seeing this, so tells the protagonist to change plans. But Vincent not gonna do that, because the Crimson Demon is still using the same strategy, that is to corner the protagonist to launch the ultimate attack. When the demon will use his ultimate attack, Vincent plans to play his trump card. On the other side, Raelsa was in dilemma because she wants to help the protagonist, but if she helps him it means the failure of the rite, and it might end Vincent's future because he will become the laughing stock for everyone. Raelsa recalls the time when Vincent's actual mother named Sarvana offers Raelsa to join her on the adventure of martial arts. Raelsa is from a ruined family, therefore Raelsa joins her to become Adanka's legend. But after a few years, Sarvana died after giving birth to Vincent, and as Raelsa feels indebted to her, so she decides to always protect her child from the rough life of being a child of Adanka's direct lineage until he becomes a respectable martial artist. But day by day she starts to lose hope on him because he was just a useless child. Return to the present, just when a Crimson Demon attacks the protagonist, something strange happened. Ravan appears in front of Vincent and stops the demon's attack, which surprises Raelsa a lot. But the thing that surprises her more is that the protagonist starts meditating in such a situation. Ravan is also very excited to fight against the demon. He even declared, if Vincent fails to defeat him, he will be his prey. Just then the Crimson Demon transforms Ravan's excitement into fear by breaking his sword, but Vincent suddenly attacks the demon and kills it. The protagonist thanks Ravan for his help. Raelsa congratulates Vincent but also tells him that she doesn't think that the Patriarch will be happy with Vincent getting help. But Vincent then tells her that the subjugation Raelsa now sees was for Ravan to prove his resolution. Vincent will prove his worth after defeating another Crimson Demon. Vincent then eats Mana Crystal to increase his body performance. Vincent then attacks the demon and kills him in a single strike. However, Vincent's body is also in a very bad state. Suddenly everyone got surprised because a relic guardian appears, and it is far more powerful than the lowly Crimson Demon. Raelsa informs the guardian that she is the servant of the Adanka family, and orders the Snake Guardian to reveal its intention. But the Snake Guardian ignores her words and attacks them. Raelsa takes a stance and orders Ravan to take the protagonist with him and back away. Raelsa then started attacking the Relic Guardian and easily overpowered it. Suddenly, the protagonist attacks sword slashes at nothing. Raelsa wonders why the protagonist attacks at nothing. But just then a thought clicked in her mind that the Relic Guardian changes his appearance. The Guardian suddenly attacks Vincent, but Reels uses her trait and easily protects both Vincent and Ravan by cutting the Guardian in half. Raelsa is still not sure of how the protagonist senses the presence of a Guardian, as even she was unable to. Vincent spots a treasure and thinks the Guardian was protecting it. Raelsa opens the treasure and finds the dragon's skeleton bone which was left by the first Patriarch Arslan. Raelsa then gives the skeleton bone to the protagonist, as out of all Adankas who passed the trial he is the first to find it. Vincent then tells her that only the church has the right to bestow such items to a person. If someone finds out about it she will be in trouble. But Raelsa doesn't care about it. Upon hearing this, the protagonist cut the skeleton bone in half and gives it to Raelsa because he will not be able to obtain it without her help. Raelsa thanked him and they together departs. Later, Raelsa visits the Patriarch to report about Vincent's rite of passage. She informs him that the Ravan, who was known for his hostile behavior toward the protagonist, has been influenced by Vincent and even risked his life to withstand the Crimson Demon attack. The Patriarch is not happy upon listening to this because he thinks Vincent was not powerful enough to defeat the Crimson Demon. But he gets astonished when Raelsa reveals that Vincent single-handedly defeats another demon. She then also informs him about the dragon's skeleton bone and also shows him half part of it. The Patriarch ordered her to break the skeleton bone, but despite giving her all she was unable to break it. The Patriarch then orders her to take care of Vincent, as according to the Patriarch the protagonist has a special power. The next day, Wilson asks the protagonist as he also has to Crimson Fortress. Sari replies that it is obvious because they cannot Vilchin go alone. On the other side, the protagonist asks Julian if he senses the mana flowing in Sari's body, but Julian declines it. Vincent then asks Sari her last name because he saw a similar mana flow 500 years ago in his previous life. Sari replies that her last name is Hisley. Vincent gets surprised upon hearing this because Sari has a magic body. When Julian asks him about the magic body and what is special about the Hisley family, Vincent explains that the Hisley family studied mana and the body, and also they are the ones who found about the heavenly skeleton. On top of that, they have a skill called magic body that also allows a person to infuse mana inside his body. Vincent asks Sari if she knows any elder in the Hisley family, but Sari replies that her grandmother had already died and she is the only Hisley she knew. Julian then asks him why a family that has such a powerful skill gets ruined. Vincent replies that it might be the doing of the Samian family because if they wish to hide the existence of the heavenly exoskeleton, they must shut the mouth of its discoverers. Just then Sari reveals that Vincent's mother was also a Hisley. When the protagonist replies that he doesn't know about this fact, she replies that might be because it is forbidden to mention her name because the Patriarch always becomes sad whenever he hears her name. Raelsa arrives and informs Vincent about the departure of Ravan. Vincent goes to meet him and also requests him to look into the Hisley family's history. At last, they shake hands and Ravan takes his leave. After Ravan leaves, Vincent requests Raelsa to train him until he goes to the Crimson Fortress. Raelsa agrees to train him and also informs Vincent that she is not gonna soft on him. Later, Raelsa tells the protagonist that he has 5 months left and if he wound her once, she will give out the trait. 1 week passed but Vincent was still not able to land a single strike on her. Raelsa notices dents on her sword and decides to visit the blacksmith to complain about it. Later, when Railsa visits a blacksmith named Hansen, she shows him every blade. Blacksmith asks if she has fought with a monster or a 9-star martial artist. She declined and answered that she clashed against Vincent's Crimson Lotus. The blacksmith gets astonished upon hearing this. Later, Vincent asks Railsa why she calls him late in the night. Railsa replies that the blacksmith wants to meet him. Julian informs Vincent that the blacksmith standing in front of him wasn't an ordinary blacksmith, but he is a longtime friend of the patriarch. But a long time ago he stopped making weaponry and only focuses on new inventions, and because of that he also received criticism. Vincent greets Hansen and tells him that he made the correct decision on the path he took. Hansen recalls the time when the patriarch also said the same words to him. Hansen looks at the Crimson Lotus and gets surprised because there was not a single damage on the Crimson Lotus, as if the protagonist cuts with his own strength instead of a blade. Hansen then asks him to show his skill to him as he wants to see what kind of swordsmanship Vincent uses. Julian requested Vincent to decline his offer. Just then Sari arrives there and asks him why is he making a ruckus at night. It is also revealed that Hansen frequently donates his money to children living in poverty, and Sari was also one of them. Vincent informed Hansen that he will visit him tomorrow with Sari. Hansen takes his leave upon hearing this. The next morning, Vincent shows his skill to the blacksmith, who gets surprised. Hansen then tells him that Vincent has picked his interest and now Hansen will make a sword for him. He also informs Vincent that there is a problem. For a long time he envisioned a sword, but he needs a rare ingredient to make that sword and it is not available in the market. The ingredient is mastodon horn. By chance, it is the same horn that Vincent found during his rite passage, so he shows it to Hansen. Hansen agrees to make a sword for him using the dragon's skeleton bone. He tells Vincent to come after 3 weeks. 3 weeks later, when Vincent visited Hansen, he gets surprised upon seeing the workshop on fire. Vincent decides to save Hansen, so he enters the workshop by slicing the door and fire. Inside the workshop, they see Hansen was in unconscious state. Vincent then sees the Crimson Lotus, which is also on fire. The fire is caused by the mana flow of the Crimson Lotus because it becomes much stronger than Hansen's expectations, and he hadn't taken any measure to prevent this. Vincent decides to take Hansen outside, but Vincent gets scared upon seeing that the exit is closed. Julian asks whether he knows any defensive technique. Vincent replies that he knows a blade technique that Isolel intended for defense. Vincent recalls the technique and starts performing it. Julian gets astonished upon seeing it because the technique Vincent is performing belongs to none other than the Samian family. Vincent succeeds to wipe out the fire. Just then Hansen also opens his eyes and questions Vincent about how he is using the Samian swordsmanship. But Vincent replies that he must be uttering gibberish. Hansen drops the thought and informs Vincent that the sword has complete and he can take it. Vincent then requests Hansen to forge a new sword for him. Hansen agrees to his request and also informs him that it will take some time because first, he has to clean up the mess. In addition, Hansen informs Vincent that he is already out of the dragon's skeleton bone. Later, visits Hansen and shows him another skeleton bone. And Hansen gets surprised upon seeing this, as the skeleton bone is not a rare item but a cheap ingredient that is always on sale. Hansen then tells her that he will forge the most perfect dragon skeleton sword. Later, Vincent apologizes to Railsa because back then he shared it with her, but now he took it back. He asks Railsa how can he repay her back, but Railsa replies that there is no need because his growth is more than a reward for her. Vincent then takes his sword out and declares that today he will defeat Railsa and will learn her traits. Railsa also declares that she also not gonna easy on him. Battle start and Railsa easily overpowered the protagonist. Rails then attacks Vincent but he easily blocks it. Railsa gets astonished upon seeing this because just now she used the mana equivalent of the 4-star martial artist, but both her and Vincent's swords are undamaged. It is also revealed that because of reforging with skeleton bone, the Crimson Lotus now can absorb the traits of its user, so now it not gonna be easy to break the Crimson Lotus because of the Dwarf King's trait. Railsa again attacks Vincent, but this time Vincent blocks her sword with his bare hands, which surprises Railsa because Vincent was able to detect her movements within 1 month, which is a great feat. Vincent then uses his attack and Railsa lost her sword. Vincent ordered her to pick up the sword because he doesn't want to win through a cheap victory from someone who has lost their sword. Railsa picks up her sword and again attacks Vincent, but for some reason she falls. Vincent then wounds her. In addition, he explains to Railsa that even with his double sword strike it is impossible to strike her, so he slices through the mana around her, and because of this, she was unable to use her trait. Later, as Raelsa promised, she begins to teach Vincent her trait. On the other side of the Crimson Fortress, the Dean of the Crimson Fortress named Vargan asks Herka why she hasn't touched any documents. Herka replies that she is a martial artist and it is a waste of talent for her to hold a pen. Vargan then orders her to drop her nonsense and check the next set of entrants coming in. But when they learn that Vincent is also enrolled in the Crimson Fortress, they got surprised and decide to nip the bud before it sprouts. In simple terms, they want to end Vincent's martial artist journey even before it starts. Later, Vincent and Julian discuss about the Crimson Fortress on the map. Then we get to know that in the past, when followers of the Archdemon invaded Samian, Arslan as well as the other heroes fended them off. That's when they took on the role of leading the training academy. Vincent wonders if he will be able to find another skeleton bone there. But Julian then tells him that it's not the dragon skeleton, but there is a legend of another treasure. It is a heavenly fruit, which is more powerful than any medicine in the world, and there is also a rumor that it can revive the dead. Vincent then asks Julian why a person has to fend for himself without the financial support of their family at the Crimson Fortress. Julian replies that it is to prevent any unlawfulness with money so that the student with a more powerful family can't bully someone, because descendants of many powerful families will be gathering as well. Vincent then asks him a very obvious question: where will they get their money to support their life? Julian answers that he doesn't have to worry about it as Julian has invested in the Magic Tower. It is the place where one can sponsor a mage's research and will get his contribution back in money. And the mage Julian has invested in is the co-owner of the tower. Was the co-owner of the Magic Tower, because Julian and Vincent just then read the news that the co-owner of the Magic Tower was assassinated by someone. Feel sad for Julian, like if you also. Julian begins to cry for his money and Vincent tells him to pay some respect for the dead. But Julian is not in a condition to pay his respects. In addition, Vincent also reads that she had left all of her possession and research to her only younger sibling Bargain Pagod, who happened to be the same guy who wants to end Vincent's martial artist journey. Oh man, why our protagonist was not able to find peace. Vincent then revealed his intention to strengthen himself as much as possible in 4 months. 4 months passed and now it is the time for our protagonist to take the next step in his life. Raelsa then shows him the path which leads to the Crimson Fortress. Vincent thanked Raelsa for everything she had done for him and takes his leave. On the other side, Vargan informed Herka that Vincent might be arriving soon, so she must go there to guide him to the fortress. But Haraka wasn't in the mood to do it. Just then a voice came out of a crystal and informed everyone that a monster is invading the surrounding. Herka gets excited upon hearing this and leaves the task to guide Vincent to Vargan. When a person asks whether he will lower the difficulty of the examination, but Vargan has no such intention. Vargan then declares that the subjugation of the illusory monster will now begin. With this, the new journey of our main protagonist will also begin. On his way to the Crimson Fortress along with Winston and Sari, the group was attacked by a beast. Vincent decided to test the results of his training. Vincent, with a smile on his face, happily accepted the greeting of the Crimson Fortress. Then the monster was also revealed. It was the strongest predator in the Snowy Mountain region, a blue-eyed white tiger. Winston got scared upon seeing the beast and also commented that he didn't want to come for this reason. Vincent felt something was wrong about the monster. Although it looked like a blue-eyed white tiger, it didn't seem like one. Vincent also thought that the monster was not alive. But this would not change the fact that our protagonist would pass this test by defeating the monster. While Vincent was fighting, another one appeared. Vincent jumped on the branch of a tree and saw that in total there were 18 blue-eyed white tigers. Julian told Vincent that it would be impossible for him to defeat 18 tigers with only 2 strikes of absolute sword slash. However, Vincent still felt something was weird because blue-eyed white tigers never hunt in groups. In addition, they are carnivorous, but they bear no scent of blood. Vincent found out that the tigers were not real, but were only illusions. On the other side, Vargan became aware that the protagonist had discovered the tigers, but this would not change anything because there was barely a difference between the actual tigers and these illusions. Vincent decided to wait until the summoner ran out of mana. Julian explained that this might be impossible because the user was using an assembly element. Vincent didn't know about assembly elements, so Julian explained that it is a method for using multiple spells of the same type at once instead of using different spells. It is more effective and also reduces mana consumption. Upon hearing this, the protagonist decided to find the assembly element that was controlling the tigers because it was the only way for Vincent to pass this test. Vincent then used the Frostwalk trait, which he had recently learned from Railsa. Vargan was astonished upon seeing this. Vincent instantly found the main tiger and, instead of striking down the illusions, he disconnected the actual mana circuit forming the magic. Vargan then told one of the guards to open the gates for the young master Vincent. Vargan then greeted the protagonist. It was also revealed that Vincent had decided to impress Vargan because one cannot bring the family's funds to the academy, but a student with potential may get sponsorship within the academy. Later, Vargan informs Vincent that there are a large number of people at the Crimson Fortress, so the protagonist has to share the dormitory with others, and it might not be comfortable for him. Inside the fortress, he will become a normal cadet and will lose any other status he has. Vincent then asks Vargan his rank. Vargan answers that every cadet in the fortress starts out as rank 9 and takes semi-annual examinations to increase their rank. In addition, he explains that the rank goes from 9 to 1. But if one manages to pass the advancement examination after rank 1, they will be considered a breakthrough martial artist and will graduate from the fortress with the acknowledgement that they have become a true martial artist. Vincent then thinks that he must find the heavenly fruit within 4 years. Just then, Vargan asks the protagonist if he is targeting the blue-eyed white tiger that was the center of magic. Vincent responded yes, and Vargan is astonished upon hearing this. So he asks him how he knows about magic despite coming from a family of martial artists. Vincent replied that he has learned about magic because he thinks knowledge is power. Vargan wonders how someone with so much confidence and bravery could get nicknamed a good-for-nothing. Vincent then surprises him by asking him how he can get the heavenly fruit. Vargan also thinks that the tale of the heavenly fruit is just a rumor, so he replies that the heavenly fruit chooses its owner, and he might get it if he devotes himself. After a short while, they arrive at the dormitory of rank 9, which is where our protagonist will reside. Inside the dormitory, Vargan informs Vincent that his servant will live on the 1st floor and he will live on the 5th floor. Later, Vincent encounters his elder brother named Malone Adinka, who mocks our protagonist by calling him a good-for-nothing. Just wait, Malone, Vincent will show you who he is. Julian gets angry upon seeing him because once he forced him to eat garbage. Vincent asks Julian whether it is okay for him if he scolds Malone, and Julian gives his permission. Vincent indirectly calls him incompetent because it has been a long time since he left the main house, yet he is still at rank 9. Malone gets angry over this and punches one of his subordinates. Vincent, who is in a different mood, punches Malone. Malone gets angry and attacks the protagonist, but Vincent defeats him. Vincent then declares to everyone to overcome their fears since it is the only way to start their journey as martial artists. Just then, Malone stands up again and attacks the protagonist. On the other side, a village thanks Herka for protecting them by defeating the monster. The elder offers Herka to stay for a drink. Herka reluctantly accepts his offer, but just as Vargan appears before her, Herka gets scared upon seeing Vargan. Later, he informs her about Vincent's feat, but she doesn't know about what the assembly element is since she was not a mage. Vargan then tells her that he achieved something that even a 7-star martial artist is not aware of, so it is quite incredible. But Herka doesn't think so. For her it is a cowardly move because the other direct descendants blow up the entire snowy mountain. Just then the crystal appeared there and requests Vargan to return to the fortress. In addition, he explains that Vincent and Malone requested a mediator's presence for their spar. Vargan arrives at the Crimson Fortress and informs Vargan that although he had caused a disturbance in the residence hall and should be subject to discipline, they will overlook it since they have received the report from Vincent. Vargan then permits them to spar in his presence. Malone gets surprised upon seeing that Vincent has the Crimson Lotus. He claims that it is just a replica and declares that it will make him regret his actions. Malone then activates the Daughter of Fear trait. It is the trait that fills its opponent with fear. Malone gets scared upon seeing that Vincent was unaffected since it is imprinted in his mane that a martial artist should never fear another martial artist. Malone, however, believed that Vincent must have played a trick because there is no way he was able to counter Malone's trait. Malone then attacks Vincent but gets surprised because Vincent vanished. Vincent appeared behind Malone and kicked him. Vincent then uses his traits to defeat Malone. It is also revealed that Malone actually is trash, but till now he is able to keep his position because of his overwhelming power compared to the other rank 9 cadets. A girl named Subjugating appears there and informs one of the cadets that it is not over yet because fear was just his trait. His actual blessing is a different matter. Vincent feels something strange since he made Malone drop his sword, but still, Vargan didn't announce him as the victor. Just then Malone stands up and reveals his actual blessing, the blessing of the Cerebral Giant. The Cerebral Giant is one of the highest gods that has control over electricity. Malone attacks Vincent's right hand. Malone then reveals that he has this trait from his birth, but he mastered it after coming to the fortress because even with his coercion trait, kids of his age were not able to defeat him. Vincent gets very angry upon listening to this because according to Vincent it is the power that many works their entire life towards and never achieve. Not only he is disregarding the responsibility that comes with that power, but also disregarding others' efforts. Malone then attacks the protagonist, but Vincent is not going to give up just because his right hand is completely charred. Vincent declares that today he will take Malone's right hand. But the problem is that Vincent has already used one of his sword/strikes while fighting against the blue-eyed white tiger, so now he is left with only one strike. Malone, who has gone insane, attacks Vincent. Upon seeing the destruction caused by Malone's attack, Vargan ordered Braun to evacuate everyone. Vargan then learns that Ceri's body is full of mana. Vincent realizes that Malone's trait is very powerful, but it still has an opening, so he has to wait until he finds an opening and then he will attack with his full power. Vargan then casts a mana barrier, and Vincent gets frustrated upon seeing this because he has much less space to evade Malone's attack. And, for now, he can't even use the absolute sword slash. Just then, Julian informs Vincent that they can cut something else with the absolute sword slash. Now, Vincent is completely relying on Julian's strategy to defeat Malone, and he has also completely used up his frost walk. Malone then attacks Vincent, but Vincent cuts the barrier, which causes Malone's attacks to destroy the roof of the sparring ground, and a large stone falls upon Malone. Vincent eventually defeats Malone. Now that Malone is defeated, Vincent attacks his right hand because he can't let his big brother become a liar. Vargan was still surprised because the mana barrier he had created was completely of a different class, and an ordinary martial artist could never slash through it. But Vincent was still able to destroy it with only one slash of his sword. Vargan then stopped the spar and announced Vincent as the victor. Vincent asked him why he hadn't stopped him from cutting Malone's hand, and Vargan replied that Malone had promised it himself, so it couldn't be helped. Just then, Vincent came running and informed Vincent that he had brought a priest as Vincent had requested. The priest asked who possessed the token that belonged to a second-class priest. Vincent responded that it was him. Later, Vincent asked the priest to treat his charred hand. Malone, on the other hand, ordered Vincent to treat his wound as well, but Vincent denied it because Malone had bet his right hand in the spar, and if Vincent treated his right hand, it would be against the honor of a martial artist. Julian seemed very happy because he had finally been able to take revenge on his brother who had forced him to eat garbage. Just then, Braun, along with Subjugating, arrived there and was surprised that a child who was famous for being good for nothing had defeated the most powerful rank 9 cadets. Vincent told his brother to choose between his hand and his honor because if it was too late, even the great priest would not be able to heal his hand. Malone chooses his hand over his honor. Vincent requests priest to heal Malone's hand. Braun asks Vincent if he can also become like him, and Vincent replies that obviously he can surpass his limits once he was able to overcome his fear. Malone, like a coward, decided to sneak attack Vincent, but Vargan appeared in front of him and informed him that the only reason he was still alive was because of his condition. Otherwise, he would punish him to a great extent. 1 week later, Vargan asked Vincent about his real intention in approaching him because Vincent had known his name from the start, which meant he had intentionally approached him with a motive in mind. Vincent then told him that he had been investigating his sister, in whom they had invested. Upon hearing this, Vargan asked Vincent if he wanted him to repay Vincent back, but Vincent told him that initially, that was what he wanted, but after hearing Vargan's full story, he changed his mind. Vargan, like Vincent, had been a talentless child who was suppressed by his background. Vargan clarified that, unlike him, he had no attachment to his background, but Vincent questioned him why he still hadn't forsaken the pagoda name, which belonged to his family. On the other side, everyone was making fun of Malone, so he wants to kill Vincent. Just then a foggy thing appears in front of Malone and asks him if he wants help to kill his younger brother Vincent. Vargan gets angry over Vincent's question and orders him to shut his mouth because he is just a brat who doesn't even have any stars, but still he is talking like someone who knows everything. Vargan declares that if the Samian and Adanka families were to go to war, he will be the first to destroy the magic tower that ruined his life. Vincent replies that he already knows this because he was the same, but what he wishes in the end wasn't revenge but acceptance and love from his family. In addition, Vincent tells Vargan that the reason he hasn't forsaken the name Pagod is that somewhere in his heart he still has an attachment to his family, and like Vincent he also wants love and acceptance. Vargan gets very impressed by Vincent and informs him that he will become his sponsor at the Crimson Fortress, and from now on the protagonist doesn't have to worry about his living expenses. At the doorway, Vincent encounters Brond and Selbra, who congratulates Vince to get sponsorship from Vargan. Vincent realizes that Selbra has the same trait as his stepmother. She can also check the opponent's power and hidden potential. Selbra checks Vincent's powers and learns that he doesn't have imagery. Vincent then asks them what they are doing here, but Selbra counter-questions him. She questions Vincent why he is alone because it is forbidden for a cadet to roam around alone at night. Brond then explains to Vincent that when the archdemon Davin lost to the hero Kajin, his spirit scattered all over the world, and there are still remnants left that form contracts with martial artists and give them enormous strength. Vincent suspects that Archdemon Davin actually existed. It wasn't a legend to frame him for everything. On the other side, the foggy thing that seems to be one of the remnants ordered Malone to form a contract with it, and it will let him accomplish whatever he wishes. When Vincent returned to his room, he noticed that Malone wasn't on his bed. Brond, who was on night duty, notices something scary, but just then Malone cut his right hand. Saizen felt something was strange about Malone, so he asked him if he had formed a contract with an evil spirit. Saizen pointed his sword toward Malone and declared that he was no longer afraid of him. However, Malone, who had lost all sense, became angry and grasped Saizen's neck. Just as Malone was about to kill Saizen, Instructor Brond arrived and attacked Malone, telling him that by forming a contract with an evil spirit, he had forsaken the pride and honor of a martial artist. Malone then informed Brond that he would be happier to kill him instead of Saizen. Brond ordered Saizen to quickly sound the alarm. On the other side, Vincent was sitting on his bed, still wondering why Malone hadn't come back yet. Just then, he heard a sound and asked the other cadets what the meaning of this alarm was. One cadet answered that something must have happened to Saizen, who was on duty. Vincent encountered Selbra and asked her what was going on, but she answered that even she didn't know. Vincent then smelled the scent of blood and asked Selbra to inform the dean with the help of her crystal, telling him it was an emergency because, according to Vincent, the situation was not looking good and they needed to call a higher-up. Vincent ordered everyone to follow him outside. While running, Vincent noticed that the mana flow had stopped, so he thought that the battle had already ended. Vincent then asked Selbra if there was any defensive seal they could put in place because the battle was already over and the fact that they were not contacted indicated that the opponent had won. Selbra, upon hearing this, cast one of the 7 defensive skills, also known as the triangular defensive skill. However, she also informed Vincent that there was a condition for this defensive skill, which required a 5-star martial artist at the vertex to control the flow of mana, otherwise it would lose its balance and collapse. Vincent arrived outside the dormitory and was astonished to see that Brond was in a very terrible state, and his body was covered with blood. Just then, Malone spotted Vincent and attacked him. Selbra informed Vincent that Malone's dark aura belonged to the archdemon Davin. Vincent was confused upon hearing this because he himself was Davin, and how could he fight against himself? Malone then declared that today he would show Vincent who the real king was. Vincent was also aware that he alone could not defeat Malone, because even Brond, a 5-star martial artist, had easily been defeated. Therefore, until a higher-up arrived, he had to stall for time. Vincent then told Selbra to cast the triangular defensive skill, but Selbra was astonished because there was not a single 5-star martial artist present. Vincent responded that he would center the seal. Selbra then tells Vincent that it is impossible because he is not a 5-star martial artist and he will collapse as soon as she manifests the seal. Vincent, upon hearing this, asks Selbra to make a decision that will protect everyone, so Selbra agrees to cast the triangular skill barrier. Selbra then instructs everyone to form a triangular defensive seal, and use Vincent as the center. Julian, who was scared to his heart, requests Vincent to turn away because there is no way they can win against Malone. But Vincent responds that if he wants to, he could have run a long time ago. But if he does this, every cadet will die. All rank 9 cadets then form the triangular defensive seal. Vincent felt that his mana was exploding, but if he wants to protect everyone, he must endure this pain. Malone attacks Vincent and is surprised because the seal was able to block it. Malone again attacks them, and this time he uses more power because by forming the contract, the cerebral giant's blessing also becomes stronger than before. Everyone is scared upon seeing Malone's enormous power, but Vincent declares to everyone that a martial artist should never be afraid of a martial artist who has forsaken his honor. Is our boy really 14 years old? Vincent asks Malone to give up because the martial artists will arrive soon, and if he gives up and reflects on his actions, he can avoid the worst case scenario. But just then, the foggy thing tells Malone not to fall for Vincent's words. So Malone prepares to unleash a big attack. Malone declares that it is the end and attacks Vincent. But Saizen also joins the seal formation and helps the others block Malone's attack. Just then, Vincent is surprised because he is not aiming for absolute sword slash, but he was able to see the sword's path. Vincent wonders whether he should attack or not, because now his first priority is to wait for reinforcement, but the seal is also at its limit. Vincent has no other choices, so he decides to take a chance and informs Celebra that the seal is about to break, so she should be ready for the impact. Vincent prepares his sword stance and attacks Malone, but is unable to defeat him. Therefore, he has to attack him again. Malone tells Vincent that he is going to grill him until he is crispy. Oh wait, does Malone want to kill Vincent or eat him? Malone attacks Vincent's hand, so now he is unable to hold his sword properly. Vincent attacks him, but Malone stops his hand and completely destroys it. Vincent then uses absolute sword slash and cuts off Malone's right hand. Malone was still not defeated, but Vincent notices that the evil aura has already gone. So Vincent concludes that his sword slash can cut the connection between Malone and the evil spirit. But Malone still does not give up and attacks Vincent again, so Vincent has to attack him once more. But the protagonist is unable to move his body. Just then, Vargan and others arrive and stop Malone. They stop Malone by casting the crystal prison, which takes a long time to set up, but anyone who possesses mana cannot escape. Herka spots Vincent, who is in a very terrible state and is not even able to speak. Herka praises Vincent for his efforts because today he saved a lot of people. Vincent opens his eyes in a strange place where Julian asks him why he is overexerting his body. Later, Herka meets the patriarch of the Adanka family. The patriarch tells her that there is no need for formalities, so she calls him brother. She tells him about the whole incident and informs him that a 5-star instructor named Braun died during the incident, and a cadet named Saizen was also gravely injured. The patriarch tells Herka to sponsor the recovery of every injured person. The patriarch then asks her how Malone is still alive because, according to him, contractors are provided with enormous strength in exchange for their lives. So if the power is depleted, the contractor also dies. Herka answers that she now knows for sure, but according to the cadets who participated in the battle, Malone was freed from the possession of the evil spirit after being slashed by Vincent, and the arm that was slashed off did not reattach. The patriarch wonders if it is the same technique that Vincent also used during the assembly of true swords. The patriarch then asks Herka to take disciplinary actions against Malone because he crossed the boundaries of a martial artist by forming a contract with an evil spirit. It is then revealed that Malone will be confined to the guest house for the rest of his life. His imagery will be sealed off, and the tendons in each of his limbs will also be cut off so he can never wield a sword again. The patriarch then asks Herka about Vincent since he has to be rewarded. But Herka informs him that he has been moved to the main house and he still hasn't opened his eyes. On the other side, Vincent asks Julian where they are now, but Julian replies that he doesn't know but he thinks they are inside Malone's memories. Vincent is surprised upon hearing this. Later, Vincent sees Malone talking to Vargan that he doesn't want to practice the cerebral giant blessing since he is already the most powerful rank 9 cadet. Vargan replies that he must practice since he is the son of the Adanka family, and if he doesn't want his life to end at this stage, he must control his cerebral giant's blessing. Malone agrees to practice his blessing. Just then, Vincent recalls his memory when his mother tells him to die. Kajin also appears and stabs him. The next moment, Vincent finds himself chained in Samian prison.